about the importance of our trip sheets and documentation.
Angie asked me to come and speak and give you guys a little bit from a litigation standpoint of how we use ambulance reports, their importance of one, filling them out correctly, and taking the time to make sure you include the information. I know a lot of times, especially probably after responding to an accident, this is probably the last thing that is on your mind that you want to do. But I can tell you that we, as litigation attorneys, get to review these, and then we get to use hindsight. And hindsight is always 20/20. And part of, depending on which side that we'll be on, is to create what information we need to glean from it. I've had the unfortunate pleasure of having to do at least a half a dozen cases out here, some less serious than others, but the one I think we're all familiar with was Jerry Perrick's accident, and how critical the ambulance reports became in that case were, I mean, it was one of the key pieces of evidence that we had. From our standpoint, we were the plaintiffs in suing FedEx, and a large component of damages was the survival claim. And the survival claim is going to be one of the main issues where ambulance reports become really important and to the attorneys, because the value of the cases go exponentially up. And so in that situation, there were a lot of ambulance personnel on duty that day, and multiple reports. And sometimes what happened was there was somewhat of contradictory evidence, or not evidence, statements. And it's not that it's contradictory, because people get this impression is we all as eyewitnesses see different things that are important to us, and no one can necessarily say that that's not correct. It's just that it's a different point of view. So I don't want to say that one person was telling the truth and the other wasn't. It's not that case. But I remember specifically in that case that some individuals took a great deal of time to take the steps of what transpired. And you know, in Jerry's case, there was other accidents, so it was, you know, there was a multiple type of situation like that. But when I see ambulance reports that one just lay out the narrative is, I have no idea what ambulance personnel do, but it seems to me in Mineral County, because it's voluntary, a volunteer type system, you know, it's to get the person to treatment as fast as you can by providing what treatment you can, and that's kind of a philosophy. But in that process, there's a whole bunch of things that go on. You initially arrive at a scene and you assess it. It's important because you're usually I would assume one of the first on scene, that you have a unimpeded view of what transpired. I would think that the assessment of what happened is important because it helps you in identifying the potential injuries that you may encounter. You look probably at vehicles to determine, is it a rollover? Do I maybe have some specific injuries associated with rollovers? Is there beer cans strewn across the area? Am I dealing with a person maybe under influence? Those observations are really critical to help include in your report, and it will insulate you. Insulation, you know, as volunteers, there's a great deal of protection provided to you under the law, essentially protecting you from any type of personal liability. There's exceptions to it, and they're rare, but they can happen. And one way they can happen is if there's not documentation. Because a lawyer can build a story however he wants it if there's nothing there to support otherwise. And especially, I assume that there's certain crashes where you will encounter people that are very cooperative, very thankful, very appreciative of your care. And then you'll have the opposite of where they do not want you the hell there. And your hair on your neck should stand up on those cases because of the fact they are the ones that are not happy, and they're going to look at other avenues. I would say, well, in 15 years, I have not ever had a litigation case that I've ever taken against a volunteer organization or an individual. Doesn't mean that they won't occur, but I think I'd researched it once, and then there was I think maybe 2 or 3 in the whole state that I could find on electronics. So it's rare. But what will happen is you won't get named in the litigation, but what will happen is you will be deposed. And a deposition can be, you will have one person likely that is on your side that wants to get the information from you, and one side that's going to want to discredit you. And the discrediting, I got to use the police department as an example because they're easy. Some officers are very good at detailing just what took place, and they'll describe an event as it took place. Other officers, it appears, always want to make it look like it took Superman to handle the incident, and embellish or take liberties where they really didn't need to, in saying, exaggerating or that. When a person does that, they end up putting themselves in a very precarious position, because if you have one attorney that is going to try to discredit you, all it takes is one sentence or one thing that isn't true, and then you become untruthful, or at least in the eyes of the jury. And in litigation, I always say that the police officers, volunteers, all of them have kind of a heightened standard that the jurors, judges look at. They're presumed to tell the truth, and so their testimony becomes more credible and more valuable than interested parties, meaning the parties that are being sued or suing the other parties. They're unbiased. They shouldn't have a stake in the game. But equally, because they're put up on a tier higher, then in the event that there's something that isn't credible in their report, they have a lot farther to fall. And so when you get into a deposition situation, you're going to have that. And in almost any more, because of insurance and stuff like that, litigation is almost a certainty in any accident you're going to come upon that involves 2 vehicles, where one is maybe responsible for the other. And the way insurance is being handled right now, you're going to be faced with being deposed, and with almost certainty. I don't know how many of you have been deposed. Yeah, multiple times. Yeah, so you can prepare yourself in a lot of ways. One is, I like these are new. You guys must have got a new system for your reports. When I looked through a couple examples of reports, the setup is really good. I think it helps compared to the old style that you used to have to kind of handwrite out of it. But a couple things I note is, when I look these over, is if one person is going to be responsible for writing down the trip and kind of narrating it, it should be passed around and agreed to or added to by each party. The continuity is now solved by having this system that I seen was a real problem, because all of a sudden if you have the attorneys and you're doing depositions and you know, the deponents don't get to sit in and listen to, if I'm deposing you, Anita, and then I'm deposing Jerry, you don't get the benefit of hearing his testimony. And so then when I'm getting in there and I'm saying to Jerry, I'm saying, well, Anita said that X, Y, and Z, but yet you're over here, you know, you don't get that ability to have that continuity of what you know, and your new reporting system is really good. The other thing that is most critical, and this is human nature, that you need to stay away from, is making inferences or stepping out of your level of expertise. Now, the most common one that I deal with is probably the alcohol or drug influence. You know, there's better ways to say in your report that if you say he was clearly over the legal limit, you put that in there. One, you're making an assumption that you have no basis of training for, that you're acting in an illegal capacity. But rather than saying it as it appeared, you know, he was over the legal limit, you say, you know, it appeared he had alcohol on board, or something like that. You don't want to ever put yourself into extending an opinion that you can't back up in training. The other ones you get into, that it seems like a lot like that, of making another area, big area was, and this happens a lot, is the suffered instantaneous death. You weren't there. There is absolutely no way, and instantaneous in my eyes is going to be different than your eyes or your eyes. And Montana law is such that it only requires there's a term for it that's called an appreciable time. An appreciable time has not been determined. But you're going to find yourself in situations, and I can tell you have one coming up, in that of dealing with it. Because, I mean, your definition of appreciable time is that a second? Or is it in my mind, is it a moment where you have a fleeting thought? Can that be in a split second? Is it 5 minutes where you have to have enough time to organize your thoughts, or it requires that you're struggling for life? Those decisions of a medical opinions where you're stretching, and it's not that you're not trying to make the right call, you're just putting, what I'm trying to help you, I guess, is don't put yourself into where you're going to have to defend yourself of why. And you can't win that battle in that you will not have the necessary medical training in any view of any lawyers, regardless of which side you're for or on it for it. So you stick to the facts in that, you know, upon arrival the individual had, you know, died. And when you arrived the individual had already expired, or, you know, something like that. But
Usually
where,
they say pulseless.
right,
Breathless.
right, because, you know, my argument is it took you 15 minutes to get there. You have no clue what happened the 15 minutes prior to your arrival, and you cannot say with certainty, beyond, you know, with medical certainty, that he had been dead for that entire 15 minutes. You can't say anything from the time you arrived, anything from that point on, because you have no personal knowledge. So when you are, I can tell you that the first thing that I get when I request information regarding an accident that I go to is an ambulance report, because it helps lay the scene for me as bad, and sometimes it doesn't lay any scene at all. You know, if there is nothing in there that lays out a narrative, the person that was responsible for writing that is going to have a very long and bad day, because they're going to have to try to pull from their memory. And I assume that everybody would answer the questions, because the first questions that an attorney is going to go over with you: why do you write these? What's their importance? Who do you give them to? I assume they go to the doctor. Do they?
Yes.
Okay. So a doctor uses them for care. Patient file, but to assess the patient when they get there. So if there's not information about that, then that's deficient, and they will go into a line of questioning, pointing out to the fact that your care was deficient, because there is nothing to indicate that would help the doctor in providing care to the individual. So I think that the two that I was given as the examples, to me, were very good. I don't see one I can sit here and tear apart. But
Wow. Pat, where were you looking for those ones?
I don't know what Pat to me, when you say that goes to the doctor doesn't see that until after we usually write it, after we deliver the patient to the doctor.
We usually give a verbal report.
verbal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they usually don't even think
Or
about
it
it.
becomes, but as far as treating the patient, the
That's all
doctor
verbal.
doesn't see that report
Yeah.
until after we write it, so he's gonna treat it
Treat
from
it.
what we say, not
Okay.
what's in
But
that
they
report.
do, if the patient goes to St. Pat's, that gets forwarded to
Yeah.
St.
St.
Pat's.
Pat's will get it
I'm
for,
just wanting-
it's further
But
care.
it's not on
It's
the-
not
not-
an immediate.
It's not
No.
immediately handed to the doctor, print wrote out.
Okay.
We have to come back here after
We have to
dropping
come
the
back
patient
after
off,
we deliver the
try to
patient.
write our
Right.
report,
We're hoping
and then it
to
gets faxed
improve
over
on
to the
that
hospital.
time though,
Yeah,
that
Yeah.
they get them,
with the laptops.
Well, and especially with the medical system, electronic medical system, the way it's going now. So that's one area. The second one is, most litigation will happen a year or so after an event. If you have something that's documented from that, like I said, after the accident, you came and sat down here, it's probably the most valuable and trustworthy evidence a person can offer, because it's your most recent thoughts. We always have this question we use in litigation, it's basically, well, you would agree with me that your memory of these events were much better on the night of the incident versus today, 1.5 years. And and what happens, the vast majority is the stories have changed. And so it's just a good way that you will avoid having to, one, think about what transpired. You can simply pick up your report, review it, and that doesn't mean that you have to go and I'm not saying to document every little fact, but these are, and the other question I'll go is, you'd agree with me that the reason you put these reports together is to include all relevant and important information related to this incident, and you're going to have to agree with it. And so important incidents obviously are the ones that related to the treatment or other things. The one I read here wasn't related to a combative person. Well, that documentation of what transpired in a combative type situation is critical. It covers your ass. It's one of those situations, oh yeah, I remember, and we put it in here so that an individual that says they sustained a shoulder injury as a result of being restrained, that is a way that I could see, a liability issue coming to the, not a result of care, but more of a negligence claim that's outside of the treatment. Example, it slipped at getting into the ambulance or something like that because it wasn't maintained. Not related to any of the care you're providing. You'll find it fall under the immunity issue there, but where you can secondarily go in and say, well, it was just a negligent situation, something like that. So, everybody recognizes situations where the individuals are problematic, or law enforcement's involved in it. If you're responding to incident involving a gunshot, or something where law enforcement is curtailing on the situation, where that likely will involve litigation too. recognizing that that's the case, recognize ahead of time that it's likely someone's going to be looking at this. Probably the vast majority, 90%, don't get looked at, but when you go out and see the situation, that the 10% of those calls will be evaluated. And then for each person, to look at it and have a collaborative effort to fill it out is going to save you a great deal of time down the road. And it frankly makes you much more protected yourself. You won't suffer the indignity of someone trying to point out and go through and tear your report apart because yours differs from so-and-so who you spent 10 minutes, they spent 2 hours, and it makes you, makes you not want to be a part of this after one of these. I mean, I don't know if that's been the case with anyone that's had a bad experience with depositions, but I have seen them. The other thing is there's no one, at least I can't imagine in a situation that you will encounter things that you may have thought about and said, in hindsight, I sure wish I would have did that. It is so much better to put in a report that this was done, and in hindsight, it should have been done maybe this way, but it may not have. The best law enforcement officer I always dealt with had a way of saying, I did X, I probably should have not done X the way I did, but X didn't matter because of X, Y, and Z. So if there's ever a situation where you're like, you know what, there's, I don't know, I could have put a bandage on differently, but in the end, it really made no difference because it stopped the blood. You're better off dealing with it up front than you will be not addressing it. Not addressing it will look as if you're concealing or trying to hide some type of negative thing. And no one I ever see, they respect that. You can't cross-examine a person that's honest, where you're going to get, well, yeah, I did, but I said I put it here. That type of thing. They may argue with you, but you'll be a lot better off. If you have a situation, and I've talked a little bit with Angie like this, where you're just uncomfortable with it, just call me, and we can talk through it. I'm like, I don't want to be I'm always available to consult. I don't necessarily get involved in defending it, but it's kind of the perfect lawyer. You don't have one, but you have the ability to talk to one. And so if there's a kind of an odd situation, and God knows in Mineral County we get odd situations all the time. Just call and just say, hey, I want to run something by you, and in that way of a way to deal with it ahead of time.
Should we just say a hypothetical situation?
Yeah, we do it all the time. But it'll save you some grief, or if you just have something that is quirky, or you just want to run by, you can always do that. And sometimes I might have thoughts, and sometimes I might.
So with addendums, 2 days later, you're like, dang it, I forgot to put something there. How much weight is given to those, and what? It's
good to do them. In fact, if I think that that's always appropriate. I think that if there's something, we always sleep on things and say, damn it, that was one of the things I wish I would have put in or thought about it. Much better to come back in and say, just say that, I was thinking about this trip and forgot to include the following. No, and someone will ask you, so what made you think of that? I said, well, you know what? I was cooking eggs and it popped into my head. And I don't know why it came back, but it seemed like it was something that would want to be included into it. I know that and you just say that's what I've been taught, to include all important information. It was important. I came back and included it. I think you better question yourself if for example, you try to do an addendum after I've called you and said, why isn't this in there? That type of thing, you wanna, that type of thing, that probably isn't, but definitely to help yourself in those type of situations. And I think if you keep more to, like I said, just what occurred, what you saw, what you did, and get away from the things that you know, but you, like I said, is, it's, alcohol, drug, you don't appear to be, under the influence of drugs, and you say, you see that there's heroin on his thing, it may, you say, it could be heroin based on the fact I observed it, but to say you actually know that was heroin in the system, you're taking another step that one you just don't want to make, because here, I mean, an example of that is, or could be, is individual smells like alcohol, and you put in your report appeared to be under the influence of alcohol, but he was simply a bartender or something like that. And then he gets into, because of the accident wasn't his fault, the insurance defense firm grabs a hold of this, says you were under the influence. He says, no, I wasn't. He goes to the hospital, and they didn't take any blood or anything. The only thing they got is your medical report that's going to screw them. So if you don't, know, you simply can't put it in. That's for someone else to go down the line. That's their responsibility. And likewise is, there's your obvious training and stuff treats you to recognize when someone is under the influence, so you can use that to cover yourself. Yes, I've been trained in how to recognize individuals that are under the influence of drugs and alcohol. I'm not here to tell you what level, but I have to know that information because it helps me in my ability to provide the treatment that I need to provide, to get them to the hospital, to provide that information to the hospital so that they're aware of it, prior.
So Lance, if you ask them, they say, yep, I had, it's always 3 beers. Can you say patient admits to alcohol use, or?
Yeah,
If it's a verbal thing.
anything that is factual.
Quote,
Yeah, quote.
Patient stated, I had 3
Yeah.
beers.
Yeah, anything, that's what I'm trying to say is that, and those statements are critical too of what was said. That is one of the good things I didn't talk about. So much of what, those statements that are you write down in your report shortly after the incident become critical, because those statements may be the whole focus of a litigation suit, and positive or negative if they were said, and then you can only take down what happened, but if so and so had a head injury and was babbling or whatever, that's what kind of happens. But I just
You can smell alcohol and they didn't drink it.
right. I mean, you're trained to observe.
What other observations do you want to leave out? If I come to your house because your wife is sick or whatever, and as we're going down the hallway, I happen to glance over and you have your little Mary Jane garden going on in the spare bedroom, that doesn't have anything to do with that patient care, so that is just something that we just totally
Ignore.
leave out. That's an observation.
irrelevant.
That's between,
Yeah, and I'm seeing so much right now. Here's what, I'll tell you one thing you need to be careful about, is officers will come to you without a warrant and try to get information related to exactly that. And in fact, I got a case right now in Ravalli County where officer went to the ambulance, people that responded in the ambulance, and asked them when they're responding, if they had saw anything that would indicate that he was using his methadone improperly, and in that situation, ambulance person said, I saw a mirror that appeared that he was using his pills and snorting his pills. You get into, you have no, I mean, that's no exposure to you, like any type of a liability issue. It results in a suppression issue, but I guess the thing is, and this is where I just call it my moral compass in that part of it. If you walked into a house to pick someone up and you saw a meth lab and you saw kids running around in the lab in that area, is anybody going to hold it against you that you said to the officers that those kids are in danger because there's a meth lab? It ain't going to happen. You have permission to be on that property, and
We're mandated reporters anyway, so
Yeah.
we have to do
right.
that.
But and so that's in those type of situations. You just kind of have to listen, I think, more to your moral compass of what, understanding that when you do disclose that information, you become a part of the whatever happened process of it.
And that's kind of included in what a person, regular person might also do with your.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it.
Whatever.
Yeah, I mean it's the. I assume that what if you have called to a scene where it's dangerous? Have anybody had a situation where there was some ongoing activity that made the scene not,
Domestic, PFMA,
Yeah.
with no law enforcement backup, yeah.
yeah,
Just a few times.
yeah. No, but that's what I'm saying is that, at that level is even more critical where you don't have the backup is, if especially, if you're responding and you get an altercation or something like that, or you have to put someone down,
Like put them
well,
down?
literally.
Lethal injections for the kids.
Bad horse, bad leg.
We need a bit of
Well,
that.
Can we please?
You got just temper.
The other thing is, and I didn't talk about this, now that you have this new system, if you have because let me say there's an accident and all of a sudden there's a 10-page one of these. And I say to you, well, let me see this. Let me see the last 25 of these that you did, and they're all one paragraph. You want to have consistency throughout your ambulance crew in that we do it this way, this is the way we do it, and so that there's consistency and not saying, well, why was this one treated so differently than the other ones that you do? Clearly the other ones were, X, Y, and Z have responded, only have, this limited, but yet when on this one situation with my poor client, because he simply may have had alcohol in his system, it's like 6 pages long. To have some type of office or policy that consistency doesn't mean that there's some that wouldn't be, you have a multiple car accident with multiple individuals or something like that wouldn't be out of the ordinary, but it wouldn't be that big of an issue, but you just, kind of, consistency is important where it is and I would assume that, the who, what, when, where, how, that, you want to answer those questions to the best of ability and different levels of accidents. You have minor injuries. Minor injuries aren't going to necessarily need the documentation, but you get a multiple fatality, multiple vehicle accident. Those cases, millions of dollars at stake. You get people that are gonna be litigating not from Mineral County, who do not give a shit one way or the other. If you go away feeling sick to your stomach, or you've maybe been looked bad, you know, it's just a case, so those ones.
What about, like, if the patient refuses to go with us?
You know, like, that's an interesting one, because I was trying to think, and we had we had one that was like that, and you know, it's my understanding is a person can refuse,
Yes.
and you know, that part of it, and I've in these ones where you know, obviously they're in need of treatment, and you know, you try to
Coerce gently.
coerce gently. I would seriously have some type of a written waiver. If you
Have you seen our new
She
refusal
went to
forms?
get one. She
We've
ran to
got-
get one.
Yeah,
A refusal
it's something
form
that
now.
signs to allow that, because, you know, I can always just see the other side, well, yeah, they refused, but you knew they needed to go to the doctor, and they had a potential as serious.
That's our,
That has helped with
Form.
those considerably, because, you know, we now, instead of just letting them refuse, we try to get the vitals. We try to see, you know, if they'll let us at least check them over a little bit before we let them sign. And if they absolutely refuse, you know, they document it really well.
Yeah, that part of it, and then come back, put in that, all of the stuff you went through. The other one thing that I had was kind of interesting is, make sure you read it to them out loud, because I've had a recent case where the individual couldn't read, and a totally different type of situation, but it involved a bank in a loan situation where they're trying to foreclose, but the court got really angry in that that the bank hadn't basically went through it with them in a verbal sense, and I could just see, well, the individual was injured, you knew they were suffering that, but they were responding audibly and correctly to your question. I read this to them, they agreed with it, they signed it, then you have, I mean, pretty much as clear as you could ever hope for. You'll never prevent, you can't ever prevent someone from filing suit. It just, there's nothing, because you don't control that. But what you can do is greatly limit that case ever being taken by doing certain steps. Like having, if I saw this form, guy is bleeding out and he refuses treatment and doesn't go to the hospital, ambulance leaves him, he dies. And I think, God, that just seems crazy in my head. So I start doing a little investigation, and I see there's nothing that indicates that he did refuse, probably gonna take that case. Then if I see just the ambulance report where he says it goes through, that probably isn't enough to tell me not to take that case. But if I see the signed refusal, and then also combined with the accident report that says, I read it to him aloud, it's not going to make it through. So you know, that type of.
One other thing, I was sitting in the bank, now that you mentioned that, and there's a new customer in there, I was waiting for my turn to talk to the banker, and so the person was trying to get a new account, and with all these new banking rules now, they have these tons and tons of papers and exclusions and inclusions and everything like that, and the bank person was sitting there reading, here, sign it, you know, and I couldn't even keep up with it, and I knew what it was about, you know, so the person coming in there needing and wanting help to get some money, they just want to get some money, and they expect or trust that the bank isn't going to screw them, but it would be so easy. Oh, gee, does it happen? You know, and the point is that, you know, when we're doing that, we need to make sure that we're doing it not like that, where they have the opportunity to ask questions and,
Oh yeah.
and stuff too.
I think the more, and if you get in, this is the other thing, you get in a person that does want to refuse, the more you can engage them in questions, like the longer the dialogue, and to document that, to be saying, you know, I talked to them about this, they knew that if they did get feeling sicker, to call 911, we'd come back, you know, that type of thing, so that when you have in those quotes in your report, that we went through a series of, 15-minute discussion of what to do, and if you started feeling this way, you better get to the doctor very quickly, and, that type of thing. And that shows that they're making an informed decision. And so that you want to build in that conversation of, you know what, it wasn't the right decision in my mind, but I went through these important questions with them, and they, understood, they knew what to look, that type of thing.
And that's kind of a speech I think that we're all pretty good at. If you need us again, if you
Yeah.
change your mind, this isn't forever, this is for this very minute. If you change your mind in 5 minutes, we'll come back and get you. I mean, that's kind of.
And it's one of them things that you can probably, in some ways, draft up a paragraph or draft up a series of questions that you then each time go through, and then you've written that up, so you don't necessarily have to retype it each time, but when I went through our standard questions and explained this, and that puts always into that report for you, that, that was covered, and then in addition, we've gotten that person to sign, or at the end, or if not, they said they were, they were being combative, they had no interest in signing it. I'd write in big letters, refused across it, and most people, sign it, and, you show them to, I said, I've put refused on this, and that part of it. The other one is because most of your, and it'd be something to look at and think about, but anymore there's the little, like, audio video recorders, that part of it.
We kind of discussed that.
Yeah. So there's this, the issue, one of the issues is like, well, it's also the surreptitious recording. Is it illegal for an individual to record someone else without their permission type of a situation? But because you're in a public situation where essentially you are responding to an accident or something like that, if it was me knowing what I know, I would have one of those. It's one of those things now, they're digital. And it's not that you would use it all the time, but in a situation where you become nervous or you're entering a scene that is potentially dangerous, something like that. Not only for that, but think about it, you guys are being exposed all the time. If you're injured on the job, you also have just as much a right if you go into someone's house and you get blindsided, sucker punched or something like that, and you're injured severely, you need to have the protection. That documentation also comes back to protect you. You're exposing each time you respond to the potential of being injured yourself. It's not, you're on dangerous roads, you are encountering unknown situations.
So Lance, how do we meet in the middle between CYA, which is what you're talking about?
Well, there's two, yeah.
And patient care, because now, we have to do all these forms and all this other stuff, and and then we have to, you're suggesting that, which I get what you're saying, but, we have to record and protect ourselves and everything else, and then where does the actual, why we're there, where does the patient care come in? You know what I'm saying? It's like we're supposed to do all this secretarial, security, CYA stuff, and that leaves little time.
Well, all of the
Patient care.
all of this, in my mind, except with the refusal, occurs after. There shouldn't be anything in your mind other than patient care, in my mind, until you get back. So we know that these are written when you get back, but you must keep notes. Field notes. Okay, so you have your field notes that you need to keep that stuff. You then use the field notes to help you in writing this. But nothing I'm talking about should affect in any way cause you to do anything that you would do differently in the field. all I'm trying to do is to say, is when you get to this point, the information that you can put into it, and if you do it in a manner of accurately stating what you observed, what you treated, how you did that, what you did, avoid making opinions that you're not qualified to make, or that you simply weren't there to do that. If you avoid that, you're going to limit your exposure to having to sit into a deposition and defending yourself.
So when you read that narrative on that trip sheet, if you don't look at anything else on that trip sheet, if you read the narrative, it should be like you're reading a story and you're there. You're gonna walk into the living room, see the same thing that we saw, hear the same thing that we heard. When you read that, that's what you expect. I mean, that's what we try to do, but I'm just asking for clarification. That's what you are.
I don't think, this is the thing, I don't think so when you're saying that as we arrived and we pushed the doorbell, no. I don't think you need to.
No, like patient, you know.
Upon arrival, we
on our
saw.
Patient was
The
laying.
patient was,
Yeah, no,
Okay,
exactly,
so she
anything
was
related
there,
to that, yeah, I think
Yeah.
that part, the color of the paint on the house, none of that, but like I said, yeah, when we entered the house, we saw the person laying on the floor, and
Surrounded by several people.
people,
that are-
right, exactly, that part of it. I don't think in like that situation, unless one of the persons maybe is providing you with details about what injuries or something, you know, getting their names and stuff like that, I don't think that that's necessarily important, because I think that's not, you're getting information that you're using to treat. It's not who it's coming from that's important, it's the information that you gather. Whereas if I was questioning an officer, I'd say, well, why in the heck didn't you get a name of the eyewitness? Or, you know, that it's you guys are different. Your role is not to investigate a potential crime or something like that. You're to just treat, and your responsibility is the person that needs help. But so I guess to get back to your question is I don't see it as an impingement in any way of what you're doing. It's a way to insulate yourself from future time that you would be spent on dealing with it.
Just
A
one
well-
layer of insulation.
Yeah, well-prepared ambulance reports likely would prevent even the deposition a lot of times. Or the deposition would be, you know, we've read your report, we've seen a lot of that, but the reason we're here is, you know, there's some other questions we thought maybe you might remember because, you know, we had heard some other information and not even related to this. It would be more of helping us establish more of outside of what you did.
that timeline.
Mm-hmm. You know, and the, you know, one of the things that always is, you know, try to get people to do is to stretch or to, you know, hypothesize. You just want to try to avoid that in any of your reports, unless it's necessary for to tell the doctor. I think he fell from a ladder, or you know, there was a ladder that was tipped over, and the person can't communicate with you, or something like that, and incapacitated. Where, you know, I could see that you need to try to come up with the way that might help in the treatment down the road, you know, in that type of way. But as long as it always forms back to the treatment, everything always comes back to that, you're always going to be safe. Because you can always, this is the way we're trained, these are, you know, how we do it. That's part of it.
Lance, I'll go back to the deposition concept. So I got deposed one time, and it was on a run that was early in the morning when it was still dark. And so as you approach the scene, you have all the other vehicles that are around it that were not necessarily involved, but some of them were involved in the incident. And so it was a pretty bad thing where there's going to be a lot of lawsuit liability trying to tap the biggest bucket for some cash and stuff. And again, it happened, you know, many months after the fact. But so when I got in there, I was not the first one, and I knew other people had already been in to see him and stuff like that. So they started just talking out, just like you said, well, we're just here to find out what's going on. These are the lawyers for this company and the lawyers for that company and stuff like that. And you know, they try to set you at ease so that you can, you know, give your testimony as decently as you can. Well, and so after probably several minutes or a half hour or 20 minutes or whatever else, he says, well, we've got some pictures here. And they pull out this big wad of pictures and stuff, you know, and so now it's in the process though, it starts to get light and you start to see adequate colors and stuff of the different vehicles and scenes and stuff where you are operating with the patient. And it ends up being that, well, where were you? You remember this truck? You remember that truck? Is this where they were parked? And you're trying to think, well, yeah, kind of. And it didn't dawn on me until, you know, farther into the review that when the heck were these pictures taken? Because it was dark when I got there. You know, and so I'm trying to remember back, and I said, well, who took these pictures? And they said whoever did take them and stuff. I said, well, then they said, is this your ambulance here? And I said, well, that's about where we parked, yeah. But it turned out that we'd already been long gone, and that was St. Regis's quick response unit parked in where we had left. And I got fooled by simply just saying, oh, ambulance, and then looking at the rest of the scene. And it turns out that, you know, then I started questioning myself about the hue of the color of blue or turquoise or whatever with, you know, changing light perspectives. And it started dawning on me, well, that wasn't our ambulance, that it was shown in the picture there. And that's when I started questioning my assertion for what they were asking me to answer questions about the pictures and who and what went where and everything. And so I had already been talking to him for 45 minutes or an hour or something like that. I says, hold it here, you know, and I says, something is wrong here. And I says, I may have to back up and say everything I just told you is probably not true. Because it's based on a false premise that I was trying to fit myself into their assertion, well, here, we've got a picture of it, what is it? You know, and so
That's it.
I had to cover myself that way, and you know, but it took me a while to figure out, am I being led down a fun path?
And I think the thing we gotta understand is in a deposition setting is you have parties for, like you said, they're gonna introduce you to, and all sides are represented, and each side has a goal or an idea of what information they want to obtain from you, and they have a way about going about trying to get that. And one is depositions in that type of setting put you in an uncomfortable, nervous situation, and the best ever thing you'll have is a complete thing, because you can refer back to it. It's when you don't have this and you're trying to pull from that memory, like you said, and you're going, you know, God, it seemed dark, but you're under the pressure of questioning, and they're handing, yeah, and you're right, and I mean, I've had it in a lot of cases where I get a person on the stand, and I know that person is going to be hostile or adverse to the thing that I am trying to get to, that they do not want to get anywhere near where I'm going. But I start out with, like you said, this nice easy questions and put you to a lull and essentially get you start agreeing and nodding with me on it, and then I show you a picture. Or the best is if I know that you're not going with me and I can catch you in one place where I can make you read from a piece of paper that shows that you're wrong and that you're on the spotlight, you're the person, and you don't want to be viewed as like being a liar or something like that. I'll start asking questions, a few of them where I know that I can point you directly to something that's going to contradict you. I then will ask you a series of questions that you don't know about for sure, and I'll pick up the piece of paper again, and I'll be holding it. And you're going to be thinking, is he going to ram that down my throat again? Or should I just say yes? And if you have a good report, you can always just simply say, you know, I don't remember is always a fair statement.
Especially if you don't remember.
But you
Well, like
don't,
I said, some of these things, they've been floating around for 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
and you've had the kind of litigation, you've had 300 calls since
Yeah.
then, you don't remember every single
no,
detail.
and that's why, but you know, it's weird though, is that, you know, certain trips will obviously stick in your mind. And when you have a good narrative in it, and you'll think back to it, you know, and, oh yeah, there may be something that's totally unrelated. For example, say, in the one where it required, I think Plackey took someone down. And Plackey got injured on it, or something like that, and Plackey has a claim. It's not related to necessarily the treatment or something like that, but you may remember other factors out there, so it helps trigger your memory of it, and you look informed. I mean, that's part of it, is your confidence level, and it just eliminates the ability, because if you don't have a good report, and I take you, and I do exactly what Dennis says, and I've done all my investigation, when I go to a deposition, I generally know all of the answers that already, in that part of it. I rarely ask a question unless it's a true discovery deposition, where I'm trying to find out witnesses and stuff like that. But when I'm getting into my litigation, and I'm asking you questions that I know the answer to, and if you don't go along with the answer, I've already have it down to show you why you're wrong in that part of it. So when you have 0 in the report or any information, it's just going to be a long bad day, because you have to follow my trail and not yours. You can't fall back and say, no, that's not the way it happened, it was this way. Because if you have it documented from that day, I can't fight with that. I mean, I might question it or roundabout, and I can definitely, if you're trying to make assumptions on time of death, or whether the person suffered or not, and you're saying he didn't, and I'm like, I'll win that battle, and can get you. But where you stick to your treatment and care, what am I have no way of doing that. I might have it, I mean, I can get an expert in an ambulance in the treatment thing, but it's Mineral County, it's a volunteer, you know, this isn't Missoula, and a company type situation, so it's a different level, but it's...
Something I just thought about that I just want to bring up. If you get, say you've got 3 or 4 patients and you get them mixed up, you know, I've done
Oh, yeah.
that. That never happens. You know, just be honest about it.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying is to, in that, an addendum, you know, I looked back and I said, oh geez, I had the wrong person's name, but you know, that type of thing. That's a perfect point for an addendum when you look back at it and say that, or, you know, you know, any type of, if it's a mistake that, when you acknowledge a mistake and explain that the mistake had no effect on it, you give anytime a person admits that they have made a mistake, they gain credibility, because that says we're human, and that you know, you're willing to take accountability even when you've done something, you know, that's not right. It's a weird thing, but it builds.
I had to testify. My first time ever testifying was when I got 2 guys mixed up, and I didn't catch it, but one of the attorneys did, thankfully, before I testified. And in my report, I just had the wrong name. You know, I had a name and description, but all I knew them by was their first name, and for a long time, it was just the guy with the long blonde hair and the guy with the green plaid shirt, you know, because we didn't know who they were. And totally got them mixed up in there, in the descriptions and stuff. And so we talked about it before I testified, and I was a nervous wreck, but it was never brought up.
Right.
It was just, you know, they agreed to not make it an issue because I knew.
Yeah, it didn't affect anything.
Yeah.
Right, and that part of it. You know, there was no, what I call a concealment effort. It wasn't, you gave the accurate information, but had a basically a clerical mistake type of situation. It's the ones I always think about are the ones that if, an attorney is gonna try to get, if you can always get to, oh, that was concealed, or, there was some effort to deceive or something like that, if you can get that, but you can always eliminate that, and that's to address it front, not back.
How do you feel about, say, I go to 20 calls and 3 of them, the person refuses treatment and stuff. And I write a report on 2 of them, but I don't do anything on the 3rd one.
That's where the consistency comes in.
Yeah, and I think that what I would advise you guys to sit down and do is, based off of this, come up with a standard line of essentially 10 questions. That way, when you do your report, is everybody knows that we go through these 10, and then you have that paragraph that you can literally like almost cut and paste. I mean, obviously, each one's a little bit different because they'll have it.
We
But
actually
you will,
have the ability to scan stuff in to
Yeah.
include in the report.
yeah, and so you have that in. I think that those ones are the most troubling or hardest because one is once they're out of your care, you don't know that they're gonna go, drink more and kill themselves or something like that, or whatever. You lose all control, and then everything is gonna come back as hindsight and being evaluated whether or not, and especially if law enforcement's not there and it's just 2 of you responding or something, then the documentation even becomes more critical. I mean, if, when there's several people there, then it becomes more clear the person refusing. But if it's just 2 of you, that isn't, a situation. Or hey, another good way would be, hey, I just need you to tell law enforcement, I just had them call 911. I need you to tell them, hey, that you don't want the ambulance. And so that, 911 always is recorded. And so, that's another easy way. Or you have a pocket recorder and say, look, just for our protection and for yours is, I want to make sure that we have this memorialized, that, that part of it. And that's kind of where I was getting into more of that. As technology's become better, and I'm even starting to use it because of one of the, actually, probably the most scary situation for you is treating children. And one of the things that I've done 2 jury trials on were false allegations of inappropriate touching. They were both involving teachers, but the false allegations right now is a troubling area to me. And so, talking about that I had, that child had been previously sexually assaulted. But in one case, it was a cover to allege it was somebody else, because they were in that part of it. And the second one was another physical type of an abuse, and it was a child that, for lack of a better word, had a really, really rough childhood. And this was kind of an attempt by mother, in my mind, just to get back in the system.
Well, I think when you deal with kids too, most of us sitting in this room, anytime you deal with some indiscretion against a kid, and I have to be really careful because I do work at school and you see a ton of whatever, is in your mind you immediately go to guilty until proven innocent instead of the other way around, because it's a kid,
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's hard
and
to
I
step
just
back.
think that the real, if I was to tell you guys at all to where you should have your radar on, is if you're responding into a kid situation, that if it's a female, if you're male, you make sure you have a female with you. If if there's injuries that are near any sexual region of the body. That part, have a witness there. I just have seen a lot of it lately. And I think that it's one of the issues that you can, hard to defend yourself. I mean, we're fortunate, I believe we're fortunate here because of the community and the county attorney's office, that all of that would be scrutinized greatly. But in like Lake County, it got charged. It was ridiculous. It went all the way to a jury trial on an assault. And it went,
Ambulance service?
no, it wasn't an ambulance. It was a teacher. But you're same, almost in the same situation. And an assault on a minor. Let me tell you, a felony against a minor is an unwanted touching and insulting and provoking nature. If you can tell me what that means, but essentially any insulting or provoking touch. Well, if you touched a child in a private area, is that insulting? Is it provoking? And then they tried to say because touching her on the neck was insulting and it was provoking her because she wanted to punch the teacher.
So if Mr. Conroe's thing where he always picked you up, lands
Yeah,
by the back of
he's
your
committed several felonies against me.
That goes if
The
you
good
swat
old
your kids
days.
on the butt. If they're 5 years old, you swat them on the butt. Well, of course, when you
Well,
want
I
to
mean,
go something, go
and I
to
mean,
the
I have a situation that's pending in Ravalli country right now, where a parent had swatted his child for killing an animal, a pet. He gave him a spanking and it left a bruise.
Oh, for the love of Pete.
And it's being considered as a felony. But
That's
the I guess to get back kind of on track is those are almost, the guilty proven innocent. If you're charged with a sex crime, a sexual assault, and because of an allegation like that, it is hell to defend. It is, you have to go after it, and you've got, a child, so it's hard to attack children. You run the, angering because you're going into trying to prove the innocence of an individual that didn't occur. You have emotion, so you have usually some parent that is in, this person did this to my child, so, we need to hang him, that type of it, whether it's true or not.
Or the parents putting the kid up to saying something.
And that happens, it does. And that's where, your spidey sense has to come up when you're getting yourself into that and to document it, or, you see, I mean, I had a case where the teacher saw that things that indicated to them that she was being abused. I mean, and so that was trying to be transcended to him because he made a report, and it got back to the parent that they were making this up, or and so instead of taking the thing, their natural response was, oh my God, I was giving Sally a bath and she had all of these marks on her, and the only pot Sally said that it could possibly come from was from this teacher, and so that touching is it's false allegations are probably actually a large percentage, which is a scary thing.
Going back to the ability on a refusal, a couple of us had gone and we were QRU at that time. And it was a safe situation. There wasn't an officer available. Because of the blood spatter that was in the house, I did take pictures on my phone. We don't have the same papers here, or in St. Regis as we do here. I was able to speak to the sheriff later and showed him the blood spatter on the walls and everything, even though the refusal of service, possible perpetrator was also in the home at the time. So it was really an odd situation, but is that appropriate to be able to have document blood splatter like that in a home just to back yourself up?
I do. Like, again, it's factual. And so if I was asking the question, well, you know, why do you think it was necessary that you took that picture? I said, well, I needed to be able to show in the event, because of the refusal, my concern of why I thought it was necessary that she go to the hospital is I observed this.
Yeah.
That indicates to me a severe injury, possible, you know, whatever.
Well, and at that point, we didn't know if it actually came from the person who was being accused, if it came from the possible victim, don't know if
Someone
it came
else.
from an animal.
Right.
We didn't know any of that stuff.
No, I mean, documentation, you'll never, I don't see how anywhere you're going to get in a situation where you're documenting that you're ever going to, you might be questioned, why did you think that was, you know, necessary or something like that. I mean, but blood spatter, never.
I didn't keep
picture
the
of-
picture
yeah.
because for fear of like a HIPAA violation. If for some reason in the picture there happened to be somebody's name on the wall.
Do you guys know that, I know that HIPAA violations that you're talking about, you're worried about?
Mhm.
There's no monetary damages for HIPAA violations. So the idea or to be as terrified of
The loss of a license though, that's something kind of
I've,
excessive.
That's
a little more than financial.
I've never seen anything like that. The disclosure of HIPAA violation that I think you need to be more concerned about is giving all of the information to the police department without the proper documentation. Or giving it to some attorney that just sends it without, you know, the proper.
Protecting it.
Mm-hmm. The HIPAA violation of taking the picture of that and putting that as a part of your report, here's where I think you would get in trouble, is if you took the picture and you don't include it as part of your report. And where you conceal it and say, you know, but there's always a reason that's where I would make everything, if I did that, a part of my report, so that then there can be no doubt of if law enforcement says, I want to see that report, and they get the right documentation, they get a complete report. And then say the defense attorney goes and asks for that same information, and he gets a report that doesn't have pictures, law enforcement gets one that has a picture, then you're gonna get yourself in a real quagmire.
So is it okay if,
Yeah.
under that circumstance, I delete it off my phone after I've shown it to law enforcement, delete
Yeah, I
it?
think it's a problem that you did that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, showing law enforcement and, of it, you know, if you believe, it gets into again, we're talking more of the moral compass type of thing.
Mhm.
If you believe that you witnessed a crime and you're a witness, I think you have an obligation to report it.
Yeah.
Personally, that part of it. But as part of your job, you're not, you know, you didn't go there for that. You went there for this.
Mhm.
That ambulance. So it's a part of this. And in a part of this, it was also, I'm concerned, you know, they refuse service, but you witnessed something that you believe to be a crime. The proper thing to do is to call 911, say, look, they refuse service, I saw things there that concerned me for the well-being of that. I think you should do a welfare check.
Okay.
But
Now, law enforcement followed up later because of it, but like I said, our documentation at the QRU
You know, like
is
I
not
see
the
your-
same as it is here. We do paper reports.
well, in the same way as the narrative on your paper report should be the same thing. It should be, I mean, this is just handy because it puts everybody that was, I assume is if everybody gets on that responded to a call, they have the ability to access this incident and then add to it their information, like in
Primary person.
Only if you're there at the same
We're all
time.
sitting in the room at the time it's created,
Yeah.
because after it's gone, it's gone.
We're going to have the ability to do that
Other than
But
a
it's
memorandum.
the
An
author
addendum.
has full control over it.
Unless you do an amendment, I mean.
Addendum.
Well, still, to tie it to
Can't do
that
it.
PCR, you have to have the author.
Unless it's not sent through.
Yeah.
Well,
Which kind of leads into another thing. Would you be capable of in your narrative, stopping if another person on the group decided they wanted to add something and then put
well, that's what I was saying.
You and I are on call.
When I get your.
so-and-so is taking over this part of the narrative, and this is what I saw.
And that's how you would do it, is if you wanna do if it's an incident on one report, is the, so you two respond to an incident, and you both do the report on it, and if it's in St. Regis, it's gonna be the handwritten one. And so it should be, essentially, there'd be two separate reports. I mean, my advice is to both of you guys to look through each of yours together and say, is this consistent? Because the consistency obviously helps remind you of certain things, and each person's view will remind each other of other things that can be talked about. I mean, is it practical because you may not do them at the same time? It may not, but then to have that in, I wrote mine at 9:30 p.m. this date, and then you're signed off on it, and Shirley, next one was at 11 a.m. the next morning, and you did yours, and it's part and parcel put together as one document.
So when we get a copy of the QRU trip sheets that they do, the handwritten ones, I scan that in as part of my report.
And it's generally not
If
filled
it's not
anyhow.
complete, it's scanned in as incomplete, it's still scanned in.
Yeah.
So basically, they need to make sure they're complete. So
We
need to
complete
get
them, they're
complete.
complete in our
That
file
part,
cabinet, but we
yeah.
don't have the time to fill them out.
That's what
It
that's
deals
what
with
it is.
patient care. I'd rather deal with the patient than fully fill out a report on the patient.
Which is after the fact.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to make sure that before we complete those.
The other one
reports,
is,
we get
and
a
I don't know if you
complete
can
copy.
have this ability, but one thing you guys could think about, and I see most people are, have iPhones and that type of thing. If you do again, we're talking about, when you're going to have a report is in my mind is normal incident probably isn't 90% of the calls are probably that way. There's going to be a 10% of the calls that from the time you step in there, that I'm going to be critiqued on it. Have it, each place have a audio, they now like iPhone audio recorder.
Yeah.
Dictate what you saw. Dictate it down and save it to your computer as your thing. Memorialize it, that type of thing. Make something like that a practice. I mean, it's a pretty standard, I think, in my mind. If you respond to an automobile accident involving two vehicles and you have significant injuries of any sort, it's going to go to litigation at some point. Your information, that should send off bills. If it involves a criminal matter, you can expect that it's going to be critiqued or questioned. If it involves a death, certainly, and then just weirdness, like I said,
So do you have to explain to the people there that you are recording? By the way, my phone is on. Everything you're saying is being recorded?
And I'm not saying that part of it. I don't think that that's necessary, but I would have that ability with me to do.
Okay.
If you get a situation where someone's yelling and combative with you, I'd certainly turn it on. I mean, there's you didn't tell me it was a recorded argument, but the truth is what's stated on the recording, and it's a public. It's not a surreptitious where I secretly call you on the phone and try to get you to say something. This is where other people are around. Nothing is being, private, and it's kept private. I mean, it's kept in a file. The only reason it would ever come out is if, you said I didn't say that? Man, I think for some reason I would have, because of the hostility and my worry that, you know, this was gonna turn bad, I turned on my recorder, certainly. And I think you're better off is the more obvious it is. If you got a person that's being combative, saying, look, Joe, I'm turning on my recorder because I don't want there to be any confusion about what's transpiring here. I'm doing it as a way to protect myself, as well as you. I don't want there to be any confusion down the road. What the hell are they gonna say? You just, you let them. But where you were saying you're responding to a domestic, there's probably no more risky situation to respond to, especially with lack of law enforcement as backup. I absolutely would. I would get what I have, and it's just a neck. It's small. It goes on like a lanyard, and it records and video as well as audio. It's exposed. It's not that you're
It's not being
hidden. It's right there.
deceptive or anything.
Yeah, it's essentially GoPro, but it's a and it, you know, like I said, it don't. It's one of those things that you may never need it, but the one time you do, if you're attacked by, you know, you respond to somebody, something you don't know, attack, it may
Save your bacon.
or like I said, the unwanted touching, or I mean, I will never have a exchange student now. I mean, I will not, false allegations. I'm like, I would never be a teacher. I would never.
It makes it hard to help people.
It does. Volunteer, anything you do. I mean, the good deed goes unpunished. Is a lot in the truth of it. But yeah, and so, you know, things that insulate you. These things insulate you, and they can do it in such a wonderfully easy way of it. I mean, in that, like I said, the refusal ones are a big one. You know, combative people or the false allegations. You know, if if so and so is acting weird, you go to treat a child and someone was acting strange or something like that, and then all of a sudden, you know, 2 weeks later, there's an allegation against one of the ambulance riders or providers, and you know, if you put in there that, you know, father was acting very strange, didn't want his daughter treated, or, you know, that type of thing in your report, and then allegations came 2 weeks later against ambulance driver. If you would say, well, there was something weird, you can look back on my report, there was something odd going on here, and it was so odd that I felt it necessary to document it, that probably stops any allegation from going any further. But if there's nothing there, and then I come in and I say, well, you do these and you include every important fact, and if you thought that there was something so strange that was going on there, but yet you didn't take the time to fill it out, good luck.
That brings up a couple questions. We have talked as a service about videoing calls, and then it leads into, do you only video specific ones? You know, then the question is, well, why didn't you do this one? What do you do with the recordings? How long do you keep them? So it's like, okay, we're not, because, you know, if we record 10 of them and the one that turns into an issue is not recorded, then that's an issue to us. So that's kind of the direction we've taken as a service on the recordings. And then the other question I would have is a supplemental report, just using the example you just used. The dad acting weird doesn't really fall into patient care, but it's better to be in the patient care report versus a separate report that I just keep in my desk at home. Or how do you feel about supplemental
Or is that a
reports?
thing of
anyhow?
alcohol again, like blood alcohol, he said the guy was drunk, we can't deem
No,
the guy was drunk,
it's,
so.
they're two different things when you're saying that. And my example is that he was trying to prevent treatment of the child. Now,
Not acting weird, because we can't say that he's acting weird.
Well,
because
you
we're not
can't.
Psychiatrists or.
Well, you can't, I mean, you observed it, you know what,
Right.
where it is, you know, intoxicated, he was, appeared to be intoxicated, you just don't start talking scientifically or legally that it was over the legal limit. That part, the observation, I don't know, based on what I know and my paranoidism type thing, I would absolutely have the ability to record with me. I would not do it all the time, because I think you do get into an issue, but where you're responding to a situation that is unknown to you, like a PFMA, I absolutely would. I think for your own safety, that part of it. I also think that the idea on the refusal, especially if they're unwilling to sign anything, to potentially document that, and one way or.
Well, and we ran into a problem as well with having somebody who refused to sign a refusal form, and we actually ended up getting one of the officers that was on scene to sign it with us, and then somehow that paperwork got lost.
No, that's
But
exactly how you would do it.
If that comes into play, then are we still covered if for some reason the officer on shift is being scrutinized?
Yeah, that refusal, if you have an officer
Will
signed
it
off.
be null
as
and
a witness-
voided? I mean, there has to be 2 signatures on there.
Well, and say you have just the two of you responding to it.
Yeah.
It's just, you call 911, it's being recorded, all right? And you say, look, I'm so-and-so, I'm on the ambulance crew, I'm responding to this, and I'm with a patient or a person right now that's refusing service. I'm talking to them, I'm going over my refusal form. They will not sign the refusal form, and I just wanted them to be able to tell you that you're not gonna sign, that they're not gonna sign this. It's a record, and that part of it. I mean, it's
Oh,
just, even if they
Is
won't,
that
even
time-consuming
if,
for you guys though, Ron?
even,
What's that?
If we were to have to call you guys to document that somebody refuses to sign a refusal?
it's not a problem, because it's just gonna record it.
It's gonna record it.
They're just gonna
Actually
say,
say that.
okay,
On the radio, we'll say, hey, 68982, we're gonna declare the scene, patient is refusing transport, and then it's on the radio.
Yeah.
And then it's
So
documented that
I
way.
could do
Okay.
that.
If you
Yeah.
have
So
that
either way.
person that is
yeah, I just would
refusing
put
to sign,
something
yeah.
in there of it to where, that part of it. You know, most of the phones now, iPhones, they all have that capability. But if you ever in your world think, should I or shouldn't I do this? Do it, because you're thinking about it. I mean, that's sending your, let that be sorted out. I mean, it'll cover you. You know you're not doing anything other than trying to help someone, and it will prevent your treatment, care, and what you did from being called into question. And as far as the other issues about it, I don't see any. I mean, it's one of those, it'd be much better to have that and avoid a false allegation, and than it would be to not have it and say, damn, I sure wish I would've. I can't believe you haven't had a false allegation here. I mean, to me, it's almost,
I think
volunteer fire departments in 4 volunteer fire departments, where I've dealt, whether it be internally, or not necessarily, or allegations internally of it, or allegations, like I said, the inappropriate touching, and that can be anything, but it.
I don't charge you
So with the URI reports,
yesterday.
would it, I mean, does it make sense, since, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when I get, say, a report from Pat or whatever, the different things, well, just like when I give a report to the doctor, it's not always everything that I put in my report. So my thing is, if she gives me that, that's basically her thing to me saying, this is what I could get to you right now, and then she gives me a verbal report or whatever. So when I attach it, I'm not attaching it as, this is her complete report.
Yeah.
So is it best to put on there, something like that, or just that you're as an attorney?
You know, that's
know how
a
it-
good, yeah, no, that's a good question, and this is, you can always leave your report open in the sense of, I wouldn't start out this as a full and accurate, complete report. I would say that, you know, this is a summary, if it truly is a summary of it, and, you know, it's not inclusive, I would give that put in that line of inclusive of it. Or if you're typing in or something, based on your conversation with Kat, of what she told you, you know, you just put, this is a summary of my conversation with it, and make that clear.
But
Because that's what happens is, in what the first questions that you would get in a deposition would be that, I would try to limit you, in a deposition, you're always trying to put people in a box so that they can't go outside the box. And that would be, you know, is this, you had a chance to review your report? Yes. Any changes? No. Is everything true and accurate? You know, all of that, and you know, you do these so that you include all important information, and you've included it. And then I'd go start breaking it down and start saying, all right, so this is essentially everything that you did, and then start going into how come this isn't in there? Isn't that important? Well, it seemed really important to know this, and, or you know, that part, or you know, you'll never. There's hindsight's always 20/20, so you can always pick something apart, but it can be a lot harder to do, and people won't want to do it if you do your report right. If your report is done in a manner where you, like I said, stick to the what you did, how you did it, what you saw, you won't attack that. It's where it's embellished, changed, or hidden things that don't add up, or things like that, or you try to, it's incomplete. That's where you get attacked. And I'm not saying you write a novel in every one, and there's, but boy, you know, certainly in your, you know, if you think that down the road, oh boy, I can see this coming back, and I'm gonna have to talk about this later, it's worth the extra 10 minutes to make sure, because it will suck for you if it's not there. Because your training tells you have to. And so if you don't do it with what your training says, then you've deviated from the standard of care that normally is associated with it. And so then I've got you pinned down that you're not doing it as you've been trained, and it goes from that wreck to the next wreck.
Basically, we're told if you don't document it, it didn't happen.
Well, and right now, the last 3 years, there has been one case that came up from 3 years ago. A company has been trying to contact us because our agency had gone out. I was the only responder from our agency, and I went to assist West End, but because I took the IC position there and expressed what needed to be done, they still wanted documentation from me. Should I have documented that later on, that I was the IC and I was not the one taking notes?
Well, I'd assume if you respond,
After action report.
Somebody should have documented for you.
Well, it should have been documented up there, but I don't know what happened.
If you-
Somebody was
if you
writing it
respond-
down.
You should always know what happened.
But somebody was writing it down, but I couldn't remember if it was, this is 3 years ago. I couldn't remember if it was one of the kids that had written it down, and
if you respond to any, and I don't know the hierarchy part of it, but if you respond to any major incident, any person, you better write a narrative down, because they will come and talk to you, one way or the other. I mean, if you're going on to West End, and you may not be a part of their report, but I would have an incident report in the file in St. Regis that says, oh yeah, I did go on that, and this is what happened.
You know, when you go to fires and stuff, everybody always has an incident action report, you know, or a daily log or something like that you follow up on.
yeah,
when
and
fire.
it was pretty much,
Same thing can happen here.
the biggest thing that I didn't really do much with the patient other than assist, because it was a heavy patient. But it was more the cutting the doors off, doing the jaws and dash roll, and I mean, it wasn't there was 2 other people in there that were medical from up there. So it wasn't necessarily a medical, it was just an assist. So it was on the outskirts.
Yeah, and that's where it comes into, in whether there's a policy or not. You know, I'm sure you guys get always a request, send me your policy manual or training manual that for volunteers. Usually I would want to know, you know, that information, and then I'd go from there. If there isn't one, there isn't. You get a question about it. But like I said, the 10 minutes, like you're now dealing with something from 3 years ago that you're trying to figure out now.
Well, they haven't been going through a legal basis, they've just been sending letters saying, send us this. Well,
Right, send us something, but if.
I'm not sending you nothing without knowing what, you know,
Right,
what the legal
but if-
basis is for
if-
sending it.
If you would have a report that you would then just be able to forward.
Yeah.
I mean, you just eliminate that. Now, you're wondering what it is they're trying to, or where they're coming from.
Well, the first one came from, I believe it was the patient, and then it was from the rental company, and then it was from the motor company, and it's almost like someone stabbing in the dark.
Yeah, well, and it may well be, I don't know if it is, but it's gotta be it's a major pain in my ass, but, is, you guys getting paid? I would assume that at some point you submit this stuff to the insurance company for payment, for an ambulance.
Otherwise it goes to the person.
And if there isn't documentation, at least when I'm dealing with insurance, you don't get paid. I mean, if you're using certain, medical supplies, I mean, someone better be putting that in to get that reimbursement. That is almost the same thing, essentially. I mean, by doing that part, it helps lay out your report. But I mean, we're seeing this so a lot of my cases is a person's injured, I'm trying to get their medical bills reimbursed, and it's providing me documentation, and, you know, the hospitals are catching up, the insurance company's always changing what they need to delay the payment, essentially, in my mind. And likewise is, you know, if I get a request for payment on an ambulance thing, and I have it just, you know, it's a cost, but then there's all this other information that these things were used, no documentation to it, I can tell you that I'm gonna send it in, I'm gonna get it back, that says there's nothing that indicates that this was even used, provide more supporting documents related to it.
So if
And
you
I
get
know
billed for-
that's a giant pain in the ass.
If you get billed for suction tubing, but it's not in the narrative, even though it was used, then we get them.
There's gonna be, I mean, if it isn't somewhere documented in the information where they can see that it was in fact used, most of the ones I see now, they will not. I mean,
One of the things we've done here, I think, is that we've lumped some of those common things into the base rate, so they're just covered, and we're not individually nickeling and diming them. And because the nickels and dimes change from month to month depending on who's billing and paying what, so it's easier just to have it be part of our base rate and say, here.
here's trauma kit 1 or whatever, something like that, to where, I've seen a lot lately, especially in automobile accidents, and the law is so unsettled. I mean, Montana is fortunate in that we have what's called Ridley, and Ridley says where liability is clear, then they advance pay. In most states, that's not the case. You have to wait a long period of time to get reimbursement for things. And so, you know, in that case, in Montana, if I get an ambulance bill in a liability case where it's clear, I can get that stuff paid really fast. And now there's a lot of legislation out there that's gonna be troubling if it goes through, in that they're saying if you're involved in an automobile accident and there's any automotive insurance, then medical insurance can't pay. So what you're likely to see, if this legislation goes through, is that your payments you would receive may be long out, you won't be able to just say, Blue Cross Blue Shield, because I have that, I'm covered, and there's a big push, for that, and there's a huge support of doctors are pushing for it, because the rate that they get, that they charge Blue Cross Blue Shield is like half of what you're gonna be charged if you're in an automobile accident, and if it's Medicare, Medicaid, it's half of that. So the creme de la creme, where they're gonna make a buku of money, is where they can heavy bill at no reduced cost in automobile accidents with automobile insurance.
And then does the medical pick up after auto pays or no? It's one or the
Yeah,
other?
if it, that's what they're trying to do, is push it to where all automobile has to be used first before you touch medical, which is bullshit in my mind, because
Is that when people start having that, I know I hadn't thought of this before, but my daughter was in a car accident and she had medical under her vehicle insurance,
yeah.
and so did the person who hit her. And so then that was the battle between the two medical parts of it, which didn't even figure in for her health insurance she carries herself until way later.
Yeah, they're, in Montana, I mean, we're gonna get off here, but I'll give you my speech. In Montana, you're crazy not to have underinsured and uninsured motorists. And you guys are crazy not to have it. Personally, there's, as a unit here, and there should be a way to do this, but I would tell you this. The vast, the mandatory minimums is $25,000. $25,000, you guys know, in medical care is
Doesn't go
essentially,
very far.
yeah, at most. If you have any surgery, I mean, that's gone. And so, I think the last estimate, they said that a quarter of the people are uninsured that are driving. So you want to have a boatload of underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage. And then there's a policy that's called an umbrella policy. It's very cheap. And that will provide up to like $1 million or more coverage. It's really cheap, but it'll tack on to your automobile coverage. So for example, you're responding to an incident and an accident occurs and another party's at fault here, you'd be able to backtrack your personal insurance onto that underinsured here. I mean, the likelihood, statistically wise, of you guys being injured on a call is pretty damn high of it. And, I don't know if as a way for you to have, individually, I know it's possible. You're not employed and being paid, so they can't say it's excluded, it's part of your thing, so your coverage would flow through.
I know in the fire department, we have a policy, right, or on our policy, fire department policy, that covers any volunteer in their personal rig to
From the
and
moment
scene.
paged and
And if they get involved in an accident in their own personal rig, and their insurance taps out, our insurance goes up to $1 million and takes over for that.
Yeah, no, when the problem, and that's great when that if they're responsible for the accident, but more likely than not, what's gonna happen is someone's gonna plow into the back of you guys while you're stopped, and you're gonna be hit by someone with no or little insurance.
That's a big controversial thing that I've been trying to do with the commissioners,
That
Lance.
happened to me in my personal car.
Yeah,
I've been after the commissioners, we've got a big deal going with workman's comp.
yeah.
We carry disability insurance for the firefighters, but I feel as a county entity, the county should cover workman's comp on the firefighter.
man, I'll tell you that I understand the idea of that, but I think the idea of ever getting into work comp, because they would base your injury off the income that you would be receiving from the job you're doing, which is pretty much zero. So you would get work comp would maybe cover your injuries, but I think it would be a lot, I don't know that you wanna be considered employees. Because if you're considered employees under work comp, you're gonna be excluded from many better avenues of recovery. That's a slippery,
Wouldn't that go on the base rate of people who were volunteers from their regular jobs though? Because I don't have a regular job, but everybody else at our department does. So wouldn't the workman's comp be covered under their
Where it
base
happened.
limit?
It's under what you were doing at the time.
yeah, I
So
don't,
if you're on the ambulance.
I don't think it is,
It's as an
it goes off your salary, the one that I was looking at, it goes off the salary of what you're doing in your,
like a disability policy makes sense to me.
we have a disability policy, I mean, but it caps out, it's not like work, I mean,
See, the thing and I don't know necessarily the answer, but they're, like the umbrella policy I was talking about, it would cover you on the liability issue, and then it would also cover you if you're hit by underinsured or uninsured motorists too. And it's a cheap policy.
Are you talking about us as individuals?
No,
or as-
individuals and, I mean, if everyone, if I was you,
Individual.
I mean, I carry a huge umbrella because I drive every day 120 miles. The greatest chance, I mean, I'm gonna be in a car accident, and that part of it. Likewise, you're out there on the roads at treacherous times. It's, you know, that thing, and I think it's $1 million coverage. I think was less than $200 a year for the umbrella. But as a whole, I don't know, as a group for you guys to look at, is something that would provide that, you know, the underinsured, uninsured motorists, because, yeah, if you get hit by a semi, well, one, you got probably bigger things to worry about than the insurance coverage, but they're gonna have a large policy, commercial, you know, that type of thing. But if it is just an average person on the road, if they have $100,000 of coverage,
It's not
that's,
going far.
that's gonna be a pretty small dent if you're significantly injured.
And plus, there may be other people tapping into that.
Yes.
all right, I mean, I've gotten letters back from insurance companies saying, we're not gonna pay your bill because the insurance is tapped out,
Right.
it's gone. You weren't the first one to send your bill in,
Yeah,
so we're not paying them, we're out.
even though we're the ones who say they're the longest.
Yeah,
The work,
no.
use all our supplies, no big deal.
And if you get those, though, the thing is you get one of those things that they're tapped out of money, you shouldn't necessarily just assume that that's true, because if they've given out their money, and they essentially didn't partition it equally, like saying, you know, there's $200,000 in medical bills, and they didn't, like, they paid 100% of so-and-so, 100% of this one, and then they left out X, Y, and Z, they could be on the hook for paying all of that. And so,
So we should run it by you.
well, I would definitely say that I would send it back and resubmit it, and saying that, you know, that isn't,
We're not buying that.
yeah, that's an easy, that doesn't, you knew or should have known, a letter should be, you should have, or recognize that this was going to exceed that amount, and not, basically,
Well, your eggs in one basket.
yeah, and thought
The
that,
answer I got was, oh, your bill came in last behind.
oh yeah, that's a good
Oh,
way.
yeah.
I mean, I would probably send that one too, and hope that I didn't hear back from you.
And they did, I just threw it in your garbage pretty well, man.
Write it
Oh,
off.
no, you didn't, they're in the file cabinet, trust me.
The other one is if you do have a situation that does come up, call someone right away, whether it be me or another attorney, that insulate yourself right away. I mean, the world has gotten a lot more, you know.
Creamy.
The worst part about us in the world of like fire, I mean, I can bill, but the only statute that I can bill for is a hazmat incident. I mean, the state of Montana only allows, you know, they say you can bill, if the insurance company pays it, they can pay it. If they refuse to pay it, oh well, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Right.
The only
So the fee just
statute
goes on to
the only statute
our
that's a
department.
billable offense is a hazmat incident.
Yep.
In the laws of the fire department.
Thank God I have a little fire incident. That was-
We don't worry about those ones. Now, if you happen to run a forklift over like a diesel tank, then we might have a problem.
Yeah. But yeah, and I just, if you're, you know, like I said, if the hair on your neck starts standing up and you start thinking, you know, those type of things, you just,
Start documenting.
yeah, I mean, it'll save you. I mean, it's amazing, and like I said, it'll be 2 years. Average case right now in Missoula, from the time I file it to the time I'd have a trial date is 2 years. And so it usually takes 6 to 12 months to get to the point where I'm ready to file. Then, you know, you're 2 years out of it on a civil matter right now. Now, Mineral
Do
County, you
people
can,
die
yeah.
in the meantime?
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, people leave, you know,
Yeah.
in and out of your thing. And if, you know, you don't have, if there's nothing in the file, and then is this, you know, whoever's the head, you're gonna sit down and say, isn't it your job to make sure this stuff's done?
Well, we've had calls too before that we're as a group or as a partnership or whatever, the ambulance will go, look at each other, go, document. I mean, you just get that, like you said, your spidey sense goes, holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna be ugly because they said this, he said this, she said this.
You know, that's where I just, I mean,
Get that gut feeling.
yeah, you just get it. I don't know, you know, after you've been on, I'm sure you know, been on it for a long time, you just, I just get that feeling, and I'm like, oh boy, this is going sideways or something that goes off in your gut. But you know, to have each one of the ambulances have just a little digital recorder, I mean, on your way back, when you're traveling back, or you're whatever, I mean, those thoughts, things that you thought, you never know when it'll save you. I've never seen it hurt anybody. I mean, that's what, I mean, you know, the most powerful testimony, evidence there is video. I'm like, you know, it's.
So is everybody supposed to have their own, so you don't record, I mean, what do you do with that recording then, once you translate it to a trip sheet? Do you keep that recording then? Or
I
you
do, I
delete
think
it?
I think there's, you know, I don't, you know, obviously probably funds are tight, I don't know. For me, it's one of the things I wanted to have. I mean, a lot of times, imagine this, but some people don't like to see me when I come up and talk to them.
Oh, I
Yeah.
wonder why.
I know, and so occasionally I'm like, you know what, I'm just, you know, it just gives me a sense that I don't want to have that I'm intimidating someone or I'm threatening them or they're going to say that somehow I'm coercing them. I just wear it around my neck. It makes me, and then what I do with it, it easily it plugs into my side of my computer, and I download it to that file, and if it's requested from me, I
You
give
don't
it.
volunteer it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I record something about you, that you did whatever,
Right.
something stupid, and I record it on there because you were kind of being an ass or whatever,
Right.
and then it's on the recording, and then I leave in the ambulance, and then he goes, or she, or whatever, and then it's on there, and it's accessible to somebody else who wasn't on the call. Is that HIPAA, is that not HIPAA, how do we deal with that?
Is it medical information?
Well, if he was being.
I think it's just, I don't know that
Or does it fall back to?
I think there's two ways to do it. One is, if I am recording a part of an incident, if I'm going to an incident and it's recording part of that incident, then it becomes, I believe, part of this. If on my way home, I take my recorder and I said, you know what, this was an odd situation and I want to just narrate my feelings or my thoughts about what that's my personal, that's for me, that's not a part of this. But, so I guess it's for my own records in the event that something goes down the road and then I need to recall on it or something like that, so I don't believe it's a part of this.
Unless it's medically pertinent to.
Right, or if you're doing it, I mean, like me, I drive into work, I dictate a lot of stuff on the road, and so if I was dictating one of these reports or something, then I would save that narrative on it, but
So
I
you
would.
want Dar said bread, milk, eggs, and whatever, like.
Yeah, exactly. But and so I think there's two different separate. One is if it's just because something as weird has happened in there that you don't feel comfortable, that not having something about it in the file, in your file, essentially to protect you, that's yours. That's part of something. And when an attorney says, well, why in the world in this one case did you think, why did you do it? Well, I do it anytime I think that there's something, strange or odd, and I do it as a part of a way to insulate myself. Or if I'm asked to remember things, that I can go back and refresh my memory on it. But
Do you find yourself getting more paranoid?
absolutely.
He's wearing Kevlar right now.
This false allegation stuff is, the problem is when they're actually true allegations, it's a real problem. Those cases need to be dealt with in that. But a false allegation can take a person that's worked 30 years of their life and take it instantly and wipe their life away. And it's unfair. And what happens in this day and age, which is really the problem, is that I call it the Fox News syndrome, is to throw it out into the public as if it were true before you have any fact or all, and then it's that, and it's
Defame somebody
it is.
before it's proven.
Yeah, and it's and they get by and say, well, it's an allegation. Well, it is an allegation, but any type of I've yet to see one case where a person has been charged with some type of a sexual act or crime where they're not labeled from that point on from the charge. It never, your career, and I've seen at least one teacher that had to go through a trial, be found not guilty. Do you think